The blow did not come through a shouting match, a palace leak, or a public statement. It came through a sealed financial order placed before King Charles in absolute silence. One signature ended what years of distance had not fully destroyed. Meghan believed the monarchy still had one last invisible tie to her future. But in one decisive moment, the king cut it clean. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles understood the weight of the page before him. This was not a routine palace adjustment, and it was not another careful statement designed to calm public noise. The final financial severance order, a formal royal decision ending money-related support, private access, and family-backed protection channels, meant Meghan's remaining monarchy-linked financial access was finished. Private royal support channels, old legacy allowances, and discretionary family-backed funding protections were being closed at once. The king had been told this was necessary. Still, necessity did not make it painless. Meghan opened the notice in private, and for several seconds, she said nothing. The words did not ask for discussion. They did not offer a future meeting. They did not leave a side door unlocked. She had expected pressure, perhaps a warning, perhaps a cold negotiation, dressed in polite language. Instead, the message landed like exile. Her disbelief hardened into controlled fury, because the decision did not only cut money, it cut meaning. It told her that the crown no longer recognized even the last invisible bridge between her life and the institution she had left behind. Charles read the final page twice before he signed. The monarch removed his glasses, looked down at the order, and let his hand rest near the pen, as though the room itself had gone still around him. He did not smile. He did not speak with triumph. The palace had quietly reviewed every remaining financial link connected to Meghan for weeks, but only a small inner circle knew the order was ready. That secrecy made the decision even sharper, because Meghan's team had prepared for a fight at the table, not a door closing before they arrived. The silence after the signature carried its own accusation. Someone had urged Charles to stop delaying. Someone inside the family had decided that hesitation was no longer mercy, but weakness. Meghan had been blindsided by the cut, yet the deeper shock was still hidden behind palace walls. The signature was only the beginning, because behind that financial severance stood a circle of people with wounds, motives, and memories that had never truly healed. No royal decision lives on paper alone. Every line carries a face, a memory, a betrayal, and a price. For Charles, this was not only about money. For Meghan, it was not only about loss. For William, it was about the future of the crown. And for Camilla, watching from inside the palace walls, the question was terrifyingly simple. Who would be blamed when the doors finally closed? Charles carried the burden like a crown no one could see. He knew the monarchy, the royal institution that protects the family's public role, duties, and authority, could not survive on feeling alone. The king had spent years trying to hold two truths at once. Meghan had stepped away, yet her name still moved through every palace argument like a match near dry wood. She believed distance did not erase every connection. She believed influence, protection, and leverage could still survive outside palace gates. That belief now stood against the signature already placed on the order. William waited outside Charles's study and chose his words before he entered. The prince smoothed his jacket, lowered his breath, and stepped into a silence heavier than anger. His father did not look up at once. The king let the pause speak first, because both men knew the truth. William felt the decision should have come sooner. He had watched the old financial link become more than money. To him, it had become a weakness tied to the crown, a point of pressure that could haunt the monarchy his children would one day inherit. Meghan felt the humiliation in a different way. The order did not simply remove support. It told her she was no longer inside the protected royal circle, not even at its farthest edge. She had expected the palace to defend its image, but this felt sharper. This felt personal. Meghan understood that once the final money channel closed, the old argument changed forever. She could no longer point to hidden family-backed support as proof that the monarchy still needed her close enough to manage, fear, or answer. Camilla watched the tension spread through the palace and feared what would come next. The queen consort understood that Meghan's anger could become a public storm, and she worried old accusations might return with new force. In a private briefing, a senior aide warned Charles that the financial tie had become symbolic weakness, something Meghan could use in future disputes, even if the amount itself no longer mattered. The king listened. William listened too. Neither man dismissed the warning. The danger was no longer financial. It was emotional. Charles had signed the order. William had supported the boundary. Camilla had sensed the coming backlash, and Meghan had felt the door close in her face. But one forgotten moment from the past still explained why hesitation finally turned into action. And to understand why the king moved when he did, the story must return to the private moment that changed everything. Every palace rupture has a moment that people later pretend was smaller than it really was. A look across a table, a sentence spoken too calmly, a chair pushed back a little too hard. For Meghan and the monarchy, that moment came during a private reconciliation dinner that was meant to lower the temperature. Instead, it became the spark that convinced Charles the final tie had to be cut. Meghan arrived at Clarence House believing the conversation still had room to bend. Clarence House, a royal residence often used for private family meetings and official duties, had been chosen because it felt less severe than a palace boardroom and more personal than a formal office. The dinner had one purpose: to discuss boundaries, future expectations, and what support could still exist after years of separation. Charles wanted calm. The king wanted language that could lower the pressure. Meghan wanted assurance that distance from royal duty did not mean total abandonment by the family. Charles felt the shift before the second course ended. Meghan set down her glass, leaned forward, and asked whether family loyalty ended when the palace found it inconvenient. The words were soft, but they hit hard. The king answered quietly, yet his face tightened because he heard something behind the question. This was not only a plea, it was a warning. Meghan framed the financial link as a moral obligation, not a temporary family arrangement. Charles understood then that the old support channel had stopped being private help and had become a public weapon, waiting for its moment. Meghan felt dismissed when the king refused to give an immediate assurance. She had expected resistance, but not that level of restraint. Charles did not shout. He did not promise. He did not offer the comfort she wanted. That silence wounded her more than an argument would have, because Meghan sensed the palace had already judged her before the dinner began. She had come seeking proof that the door was still open. Instead, every careful answer made the door feel narrower. William later learned what had happened through a documented palace account prepared after the dinner. The prince focused on one phrase Meghan used that night: "You cannot cut what the public still sees." Those words alarmed the king's advisors because they turned private support into public leverage. William understood why the phrase stayed with his father. The future king saw the danger clearly. If the monarchy kept even one financial tie alive, Meghan could point to it as proof that the institution had never truly let go. Charles wrote a private handwritten note after the dinner, and that note revealed the moment his hesitation began to break. The king wrote that the arrangement had become impossible to defend because kindness was being mistaken for obligation. Meghan had left the table feeling unheard. Charles had left it feeling cornered. That dinner did not end with raised voices, but it sent him toward the confrontation everyone feared. From that night forward, the question was no longer whether the financial tie would survive, it was who would be in the room when it finally died. The confrontation did not happen in public, where smiles could soften the blow. It happened behind closed doors, where every pause sounded like judgment. Meghan wanted an explanation. Charles wanted finality. William wanted the monarchy protected before another storm could begin. And when the three forces collided, the room became colder than any palace corridor outside it. Meghan entered the conversation with the severance notice folded tightly in her hand. The financial severance notice, a formal written message explaining that remaining money-linked royal support had been ended, had not given her warmth, warning, or room to bargain. It had spoken in the clean language of control. Meghan refused to let it stand as a cold administrative act. She wanted Charles to say the meaning out loud. She wanted the king to admit that this was not just accounting. This was rejection. Charles stayed seated, and his stillness made the moment harder. The monarch had agreed to one private conversation, but not because the order could be reopened. He agreed because even a final decision deserved a human voice. Meghan told him the cut felt like public rejection, disguised as financial housekeeping. She said the palace knew exactly how the world would read it. Charles listened without interrupting, but the king's face carried the strain of a father being forced to answer as a ruler. Meghan pressed harder, because silence felt like another insult. She said the monarchy had taken the last invisible thread and snapped it in front of her. Charles answered quietly that protection could not become pressure. The king told her family could not be used as a permanent claim against the crown. The crown, the monarchy's authority, duty, and public trust, had to remain bigger than personal pain. Meghan heard the words and felt the door close again, this time in his voice. William entered only after the first exchange had already burned through the room. The prince closed the door behind him and did not speak at once. His presence said enough. Meghan looked toward him and understood what she had not wanted to believe. This was not only Charles's burden. This was the future king's position too. William had not come to comfort the wound. He had come to protect the line that his father had finally drawn. Charles glanced at his son, and the silence between them confirmed everything. The king had carried the sorrow, but William carried the future. Meghan saw that the decision had become generational, not temporary. The monarchy's next ruler supported the severance, and that made the cut feel impossible to reverse. No apology came. No promise softened the ending. Meghan left with the letter still folded. Charles remained with the weight of the decision, and William stood inside the room as proof that the palace had chosen its boundary. Yet even that painful exchange did not reveal the full truth, because the severance order had been shaped by forces far deeper than one father's decision. A king may sign the order, but a palace decision is rarely born from one hand alone. Behind Charles stood advisors, financial officers, legal minds, and family voices who saw the same danger from different angles. Still, at the center of it all was one man sitting beneath the weight of a crown, forced to choose between blood and survival. Charles sat with the revised order and felt the pressure close around him. The Financial Review, a careful palace examination of money links, support channels, and future risks, had reached one hard conclusion. Any continuing support link to Meghan created confusion about where she stood. She was no longer serving royal duties, yet the old connection still suggested protection from the institution. That mattered, because the monarchy survives on clear lines. If those lines blur, every private dispute can become a royal crisis. Charles did not want the order to sound cruel. The king read one phrase, stopped, and drew a firm line through it. The wording was too cold, too final, too sharp for a family wound. Camilla watched him struggle, and understood what the page was taking from him. The queen consort knew he was not simply cutting Meghan off. He was cutting away another piece of family history, another hope that time might one day soften what distance had broken. William's influence became clear through a private recommendation placed inside the review file. The prince's position was direct. Future royal funding had to follow duty, not bloodline pressure. He believed the crown could not fund, shield, or indirectly protect someone who no longer carried its public role. The crown, meaning the monarchy's authority and duty to the public, had to be protected from personal claims that could weaken it. William saw the issue as bigger than Meghan. He saw it as a warning for the monarchy his children would inherit. Sophie was quietly consulted through a documented private briefing because she had built a reputation for calm judgment. The trusted confidant warned that delay would only deepen the wound. She did not speak with anger. She spoke with the careful tone of someone who understood palace damage before it reached the headlines. Sophie believed half measures would look weak to the public and cruel to Meghan, because they would keep hope alive while preparing the same ending in secret. Charles returned to the page and replaced the harsh phrase with softer wording. Camilla noticed his hand shake slightly before he passed the order back. The king had softened the language, but he had not changed the decision. William had drawn the future line. Sophie had confirmed the danger of delay. Camilla had seen the cost in his face. But softened words could not soften the impact, because once the decision reached Meghan, the first wave of fallout began immediately. The first hours after a royal rupture are never calm. Phones light up, doors close, voices drop. Meghan's world did not collapse in public, it tightened in private. The message was clear, brutal, and impossible to dress up. The monarchy had withdrawn the last financial thread. What came next was not silence. It was strategy, grief, and anger moving at the same time. Meghan walked away from the table where the printed notice lay open. Her advisors began reviewing every line, trying to measure what the cutoff truly touched. The cutoff meant more than one payment ending. It affected private financial expectations, old family-backed support channels, and Meghan's symbolic claim that some royal connections still remained. That mattered, because money inside the monarchy was never just money. It carried approval, it carried protection, it carried proof that a person still belonged close enough to be considered. Harry picked up the notice after Meghan stepped back. He read the same sentence twice, then exhaled as if the room had lost air. The order did not name his pain, but he felt it anyway. Meghan saw his face change, and that made her anger sharper. This was not only her humiliation, it touched his separation too. Harry understood that if the palace could cut her final tie with such force, then his own place outside the institution had hardened into something colder than distance. Meghan paced and asked why the decision had arrived with such finality instead of warning. She had expected pressure, perhaps even punishment, but not a message that sounded already sealed before her side could answer. Harry tried to steady the room, yet he looked shaken. He knew the monarchy, the royal system of duty, public service, and family authority, had chosen clarity over comfort. Meghan heard that clarity as rejection. Harry heard it as the closing of another family door. Charles moved quickly on the palace side, but not with triumph. The king requested through a controlled internal briefing that no one use victorious language. An internal briefing is a private instruction shared with palace staff, so everyone understands the official position before rumors spread. He wanted the cut treated as sorrowful necessity, not celebration. That mattered, because Charles knew one careless phrase could make the decision look cruel, and the monarch did not want cruelty attached to his name. Aides soon discovered the severance went even deeper than expected. The order also blocked future emergency appeals through older private family channels, meaning Meghan could no longer reach back into hidden support routes during a crisis. That revelation changed the mood. Meghan saw strategy. Harry saw finality. Charles saw the cost of a boundary finally enforced. Yet amid the anger and shock, one private conversation would reveal that the severance was not just punishment. It was the monarchy drawing its final boundary. The turning point did not come with a royal announcement or a thunderous confrontation. It came in a private room, with no aides, no briefing notes, and no one left to perform for. Charles and William faced the part of the decision that no document could explain. Meghan had been cut off financially, But the deeper question was whether the family could survive what the monarchy required. Charles sat near the fireplace, not behind a desk, and that choice said everything. The king did not want this to feel like another official meeting. He wanted his son to see the man behind the decision, not only the monarch who had signed it. William stood at first, careful and still, before lowering himself into the chair opposite his father. The order had already taken effect, and the severance, the complete ending of Meghan's remaining money-linked royal support, had become real. No aide took notes. No advisor shaped the words. Only father and son remained with the cost. William understood why this meeting mattered. The prince knew Meghan's financial cut did not only define her place outside royal life, it also defined Harry's. Every removed support channel made the separation harder, colder, and more permanent. Charles knew that too, and the king carried it in his voice when he admitted the decision felt like closing a door he once hoped might stay slightly open. He had delayed the order for that reason. He feared the world would see it not as discipline, but as abandoning his son completely. Charles spoke with sadness, not weakness. The monarch revealed through this private conversation that he had delayed the final signature because Harry's name stood behind every page, even when Meghan's name stood on the order. William listened, then answered with the restraint of someone carrying the future. The crown, meaning the public duty and authority of the monarchy, could not keep paying emotional debts that threatened the next generation. He said his children could not inherit a throne still trapped inside private battles. William did not dismiss his father's pain. The prince gave it a shape. He told Charles that boundaries were not abandonment when the institution itself was being pulled into conflict. That answer changed the room. The king looked at his son and understood that the future had already arrived, not with cruelty, but with clarity. William was not asking him to stop loving Harry. He was asking him to stop letting love become a weakness the monarchy could not afford. Charles accepted the truth in silence before he spoke again. The king had cut Meghan's final financial tie, but in that quiet exchange with William, he finally accepted why it had to stand. Father and son reached agreement without celebration, without victory, and without pretending the wound had healed. And when that private resolve hardened into public posture, the story escaped palace walls and exploded into the national conversation. By morning, the private severance had become a public earthquake. The monarchy could contain documents, meetings, and palace whispers, but it could not contain the image of Meghan being financially cut from the royal world once and for all. Across Britain and beyond, the story was no longer about numbers. It was about rejection, survival, loyalty, and the cost of walking away. Charles kept the palace response short because every extra word carried danger. The statement emphasized financial clarity, duty, and the separation between private family life and public royal responsibility. That mattered because the monarchy had to show control without sounding cruel. The palace response, the official message released to explain the royal position, was designed to tell the public that Meghan's financial cut was not revenge, but a boundary. Still, boundaries can look brutal when they land on a person already standing outside the gates. Meghan's supporters saw the timing as cold. They argued that the monarchy had chosen the harshest possible message and sent it with the calmest possible voice. Meghan felt that judgment spreading before she even answered it. Every headline turned her private shock into public debate. Harry felt it too, because every story about her severance reopened the question of his own separation. He knew the world was not only judging Meghan, it was judging him, his choices, and the life he had built beyond the palace. Broadcasters framed the decision as the clearest royal split in years. One morning presenter held up a London newspaper front page with a stark black headline reading, "The Final Cut," beside an image of closed palace gates at dawn. The presenter called it, "The clearest financial divorce in modern royal memory," and the phrase spread fast. A broadcaster, a television or radio journalist who presents public stories, gave the decision a name the palace itself had avoided. Suddenly, the severance was no longer hidden inside royal language. It had become a national symbol. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered near the railings. Some stood quiet, some argued. One woman looked toward the gates and said, "This is what happens when family becomes institution." The words captured the public mood with painful simplicity. Loyalists believed Charles had finally done what duty required. Critics believed the king had turned family pain into royal discipline. Meghan heard the public split forming around her name, and Harry understood that silence would not protect them from the storm. The palace held its line. Charles did not soften the statement. William did not step away from the boundary. Meghan became the face of the cut. Harry became the shadow behind it. And the monarchy became the force that had finally chosen separation over sentiment. But headlines could only describe the rupture. They could not decide what it meant until the final emotional cost was measured. In the end, the severance was not only about Meghan. It was about what the monarchy decided it could no longer carry. Charles chose the crown over the comfort of an unfinished family bond. William chose the future over the fear of appearing harsh. Meghan, blindsided and wounded, learned that distance from the palace could become distance from every remaining privilege attached to it. Charles understood that the final financial cut had become bigger than one woman, one order, or one painful family chapter. The final financial cut, the complete ending of Meghan's remaining money, linked royal support, now stood as the monarchy's clearest boundary between family identity and royal responsibility. That mattered because the crown could not keep sending mixed signals. If someone no longer served the institution, the palace could no longer leave hidden doors open through money, protection, or private influence. Meghan folded her copy of the order away, no longer shocked, but visibly changed. The humiliation had not disappeared. The anger had not cooled. But clarity had arrived, and clarity can be sharper than betrayal. She knew the palace would no longer leave quiet channels available for her return, her leverage, or her emergency appeal. The old connection had been reduced to history. Meghan had once believed distance from royal duty did not mean distance from every royal privilege. Now she understood the cost of that distance in full. Charles stood alone after the final brief was delivered and placed the signed order into a closed folder. The king rested his hand on it for one quiet second, not as a victor, but as a father, carrying a wound he had chosen not to reopen. His order confirmed a brutal truth. Emotional history no longer guaranteed financial connection to the institution. The monarchy, the royal system built around public duty, inherited role, and national trust, had reclaimed control. But the monarch paid for that control with sadness. William's role confirmed the future direction of the royal family. The prince had supported a leaner monarchy, one colder when needed, and unwilling to fund private conflict simply because blood ties made the decision uncomfortable. He knew the public might call it harsh. He knew Meghan would feel punished. But William also knew his children could not inherit a crown still tangled in unresolved private battles. The future king had secured the boundary his father had hesitated to draw. Harry understood the severance as a final message to both him and Meghan. Royal distance now had real consequences. It was no longer a soft separation filled with invisible support and quiet exceptions. It had become a hard line. Meghan lost the last financial thread. Charles reclaimed control. William secured the future boundary. Harry saw the price of life outside the palace circle. And the monarchy chose survival over sentiment. There is no unfinished question left in this moment, only the hard conclusion that the monarchy finally closed the door it had spent years leaving half open. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.